Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. We are back once again looking at the A to Z of Hidden Gems for the PlayStation 1, and in this video we're going to take a look at 10 games starting with the letter G that you might have missed. As always, let us know in the comments below any other games that should be included, as well as any for any other letter. But for now, how about I shut the hell up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. We are going to start with an arcade classic that got a bit of an upgrade, with Galaga Destination Earth. This is a space shooter where you'll be taking on waves of evil alien bug robot things. The game starts out just like the arcade, with waves of enemies shooting down at you while you shoot back at them. They'll move across the screen and their attacks aren't too hard to avoid. After this, the game switches perspective and now you've got a third person view, and it plays a lot like a Star Fox game, which is kinda nice. Here you'll be flying through space where you'll need to take out more aliens, as well as avoid asteroids and other spacecraft as they come towards you. Then, you'll never believe it, the view shifts again to the side view. Now the game plays more like R-Type and games like that. Is there no end to this game's variety? Well, actually yes, that's where it ends. To help mix things up, you're also sometimes given objectives, like collecting items or rescuing people lost in space. This is little more than just flying into them, but it does help mix things up a bit. The graphics here are a little basic, there isn't much detail on anything, but it doesn't look terrible. This is good though, as it means the frame rate is consistently smooth and makes the flying and shooting action responsive no matter what the camera has decided to do. It can get a bit repetitive, as you are really just shooting waves of enemies over and over, but that isn't really a problem as it's kind of the point of the game like this, and there's some cool things in there like being able to capture enemies and use them as your allies, so you can use their different weapons to take out the other enemies. I never really got used to how this worked, but I'm sure it would have been quite simple if I'd bothered just to figure out how it worked. Overall though, this actually is a fun little shooter. It does a good job of harking back to its arcade roots and adds enough new stuff to bring it into the modern era. Well, modern for back in the 90s. It is worth a look if you're a fan of the original. As always, the second game in this video is a fighting game, and this time it's Guilty Gear from Atlas. This is a great 2D fighter where you choose from one of 10 characters, each one known as Gears, and then you go round the world murdering all the ones that you didn't choose to play as with a variety of sharp objects. There is a ton of fantastic pixel art here, and each of the characters is unique and crazy looking. They all animate perfectly, which in turn helps the controls to be responsive and precise. Fighting here is a ton of fun, and I never had any trouble pulling off special moves. In terms of controls, it plays kinda like the Street Fighter games, but not exactly the same. Most moves are done the same as in that game, but they do feel different, and you'll need to play for a bit to get used to how it works. Though at the same time, new players will be able to dive straight in and just use the regular attacks. Something I really like here is that the loading screen reminds you of how to do your special moves, which I thought was a really nice touch, and something I'd actually like to see more of in other fighting games. For people who like to learn fighters, there is a fair bit to get involved with here. As well as each character's special moves, you also have a power bar that builds up. This can be used to pull off special powerful attacks, or you can give yourself buffs to do more damage or take less, which is a cool idea. You can also do counter attacks by blocking just at the last minute. This causes the screen to turn red and your opponent is stunned for a second. This is separate to making them dizzy, and they can soon snap out of it though. While they are in this state though, and something I found out the hard way, is that you can perform an instant kill move. In theory, you could do this within the first few seconds of every fight, and even if it is the first round, pulling off one of these moves ends the fight there and then. Obviously they're very tough to do, and I've actually never managed to do it myself, even with a guide. But don't worry, the computer has done it to me enough times to let me know that it's a baller move. I really had a lot of fun with this one, and it's a series that's still going today, so I'll definitely be on the lookout for more to play, as I really love 2D fighting games, and I can imagine the new ones must be absolutely gorgeous to look at and play. Time for the other type of beat 'em up now with Gekido Urban Warriors. This plays more like Streets of Rage and sees you running through various urban locations, kicking the crap out of anyone and everything. There is a story here which is your usual one of bad gangs, crime bosses and a bunch of cops and vigilantes that have to stop them. What is nice here is that you get 4 characters to choose from, and there's even more to unlock as you play. As you'd expect, each character has his or her own stats, with some being faster, some stronger, and so on. You know the drill. All the characters actually play very well and really do have their own movesets, and that's something that sets this game apart from some of the others. There is a ton of different combos you can do here. These are unlocked as you reach certain score milestones, and they get crazy complicated. In fact, I'd probably say that a lot of the combos here are overly complex, which is something that you could say about the controls overall. The game uses every button on the controller. All 4 face buttons are different punches and kicks, L&R are to jump and crouch, and you also have buttons that activate specials and make you block. When you start playing, it can be very confusing. When you get a new combo, it tells you at the bottom of the screen and shows you how to pull it off. These start off fine with simple combinations, but soon become combinations of 5 or 6 button presses, including holding L or R and then tapping the other one. Yeah, you can forget most of the combos. Of course, the more complicated they are, the more damage they tend to do, but chances are you'll find a few kind of simple ones that work for you and stick with those. The graphics here are excellent, with loads of detail, and the animation is super smooth. There's always a load of enemies on screen at once, and though there is a bit of slowdown, it's never too bad. The variety in enemies is good here, with new ones popping up all the time. They come in all shapes and sizes, and some have weapons like guns or knives that you can steal from them. You can also pick up a load of things around the levels, like boxes and tyres to throw at people. For some reason, pretty much all of these explode, and I actually did find that it made me take more damage than most of the enemies, as enemies are always relentless, and by the time I'd picked up an object, they were on me and just kicked my ass. The bosses here are also tough bastards and will take a few tries to beat while you get used to the game. In fact, I haven't actually managed to beat this game yet, and it's one that I've had for about 20 years now. It's bloody hard and doesn't give you that many lives or continues. I have gotten pretty damn far into it though, and it definitely would be doable if I wanted to put the time in. You can also play this in 2-player co-op, and that is a hell of a lot of fun to learn the combos and kick some butt with a friend. It's also worth mentioning that the soundtrack is all licensed stuff, and while I don't think it really suits the action all that well, it is actually a really good collection of 90s dance and techno, and it'll definitely get you in the mood. Check this one out when you want to punch people in the face. Now, the next game is not to be confused with Gekido, as it's just called Gekioh, Shooting King, and it's from Natsume. This is a great little vertically scrolling shooter where you are of course a little ship and have to take on hundreds of bad ships with a variety of powerful weapons. Everything is made up of 2D sprites, and while it definitely isn't pushing the PS1, it looks fantastic. There's loads of detail everywhere and everything runs super smooth. You get a ton of enemies on screen at once, as well as their bullets and yours, and it never slows down, even when there's dozens of explosions. You start with your standard laser fire, and this can be upgraded so a load of bullets are firing at once in a spread. This is probably my favourite weapon, even if it isn't necessarily the most powerful. You also get missiles which home in on enemies, and you get a lightning attack that also homes in on enemies and does a ton of damage, but has a slow rate of fire. All of these can be upgraded to fire more shots or have a bigger attack range. Each weapon also has its own bomb attack that clears the screen of most enemies and does massive damage to bosses. They all work well, and you'll soon find which weapon works best for you. There's a few game modes here, but I'll be honest, I couldn't really tell the difference between them. The levels all seemed to be the same as far as I could tell, and the gameplay didn't really start to change. Though I'm not very good at shooters, but I did find that I could get pretty far into this one, which was nice. It's not quite a bullet hell game, though the bosses definitely try and sneak into that category. Sadly, you can only take one hit before you die, but you never get sent back too far, and thankfully you don't lose all your power, it just decreases a bit, so you don't have to start from scratch every time. And that's it really. It's a fairly standard shooter, but I really enjoyed playing this one. I love the look of it, and the gameplay is super smooth and responsive. I think this would be a good one for people that are new to shooters, as well as you veterans out there. GPolice from Psygnosis is another fun futuristic police brutality simulator. It's a 3D action game where you have to enforce the law in a few open world levels, which are pretty big, self-contained city sectors. As always with the future, there's gangs knocking around everywhere causing all sorts of mayhem, so you've got to take them down with extreme prejudice. In this future, the police spend most of their time patrolling in high-powered helicopter things or walking mechs, armed to the teeth with rockets, machine guns and lasers. And it's just as well, as the people causing trouble have some decent hardware of their own. You spend your time flying around the cities, unless you're in a mission where you play as a mech of course, in which case you run, and you've got to make it to checkpoints, do patrols of the city, and answer any calls that come in about crimes. It's all pretty fun, and the controls here are very responsive, adding to the enjoyment. They will take a while to get used to, as you use the X button to accelerate, the triangle button to reverse, and the shoulder buttons to control your pitch and strafe, and basically every other button on the controller is a weapon. Once you've done it for a while, it'll be second nature though, and you'll have no problems taking down gang members and their various flying and driving vehicles, if you can see them, that is. The main issue really with the game is that it's quite hard to see anything, and that's for a couple of reasons. Firstly, every mission seems to take place at night, so everything is really dark to start with, and I'm assuming this was a conscious choice as the draw distance here is pretty terrible. You can barely see 10 meters in front of you before everything just starts popping into view. Now, while this doesn't really take away from the game too much, it can mean that depending on the camera angle that you have, you literally are just staring at a black screen. To be fair though, the game does try to help, and you get a 2D wireframe outline of buildings and things like that before they appear. It's kind of disguised as a sort of computer display that you'd kind of expect to see in an Iron Man film. This does help you know when you're about to smash into a building, but it's also just a shame that this is the best they could do with the draw distance. Presumably this is because they wanted to keep the game at a relatively smooth pace. And to be fair, it does play very smoothly, and the controls are still decent. The combat is actually quite exciting, and the mix-up of mission objectives and locations does a good job of keeping things fresh. This is a game that I would really love to see get a new entry into the series for modern systems. Flying around in a futuristic city responding to crimes would be awesome, but let's face it, it's never going to happen. Anyway, if you eat carrots and can see in the dark and bloody hate crime, then this is a good game to check out. Back in the PS1 days, Tony Hawk was the king of extreme sports, so it's no surprise that other companies, including Sony themselves, tried to capitalise on the craze. And that's why we got Grind Session. This skateboarding game is basically a carbon copy of the Tony Hawk series that does a lot of it quite well, but does lack the polish to really make it a classic. If you've ever played a Tony Hawk game, then you'll be able to jump right in here. The controls are basically exactly the same. You have a jump button as well as buttons for flip tricks, grab tricks and grind. These all work quite well most of the time, but doing tricks is never as responsive as it should be, and equally it's noticeably harder to land after big jumps and spin tricks here. You really have to line up yourself basically perfectly if you want to avoid a face full of half pipe. It does take some practice, but once you do get it down, you'll be able to rack up high scores and combos. There are quite a few levels in this game, and each one has a list of objectives and a time limit to complete them in. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? These objectives include getting a certain score, skating over certain objects, finding items, and doing certain tricks in certain parts of the level. Yeah, it really does sound familiar, doesn't it? Most of these objectives are reused for most stage, but slightly reskinned, and these levels range from warehouses to streets and of course skate parks. The graphics here are actually pretty good, and it runs very smoothly. The levels do fall in the everything is brown and grey category, but they do have some nice variety, with things like trains and other vehicles to avoid at times. Of course, if you do a trick over one of these, you'll get the big points. Every few levels you take part in a competition where you've got 3 attempts to get the highest score. These are pretty tough actually, and will really test your skills of not falling over, which is a lot easier said than done. Another thing that won't surprise you here is that the game has a licensed soundtrack full of punk, rock and some hip hop. Now I actually quite like the soundtrack here, and some of the songs are the same ones you actually find on the Tony Hawk games, which is kind of funny. I really do try to avoid making too many comparisons when games are kind of similar, but it's very hard to do that with this one, as it really does play like a beta version of Tony Hawk. You already know that it'll never be able to hold a candle to that series, and if you do have them, there's not really any reason to play this. However, that doesn't mean it's a bad game. In fact, it's actually pretty damn fun. The controls aren't quite there, but it's still a very playable game that will give you a few hours of entertainment if you give it a chance. Another craze going around this time was the vehicular combat game craze, with games like Twisted Metal and Vigilante 8 letting players take control of crazy violent vehicles and blast the hell out of each other. Grudge Warriors is a similar kind of game where you choose from a ton of different teams of crazy characters with extremely 90s designs. These each have their own tank and you need to blow the crap out of everyone else. You're soon flown into some 3D environments where you've got to fight another one of the teams, but as well as just having to kill, you also have objectives on the levels like collecting icons or destroying a certain number of hidden objects on the level. These are usually generators or other electronic looking things, and they are often very well hidden, sometimes annoyingly well hidden. Luckily, all the tanks control well and are pretty nippy, letting you get around the levels quite fast, and you'll need to explore every inch of the stage if you want to find everything you need. Some of the levels took me literally hours to figure out, and sometimes even when I did, I wasn't quite sure how I managed to do it. Or there was times where I managed to fall off a ledge and just happened to land on another ledge that I didn't even know existed that contained an item that I needed. Combat in the game is actually quite good, but not perfect. Each team has their own weapon loadout, and essentially you get a rapid fire shot and a selection of rockets. You can lock onto enemies as well as the automated weapons located around the islands that you're on, or you can manually aim. This can be quite hard to do, so the lock-on is often recommended. Something that is annoying though is that the enemies seem to take a ton of hits before they die. Thankfully you do also take a fair few yourself, and there are weapon and shield power-ups you can find and regenerators all over the place, which is very handy. Graphically the game is decent. There's the usual amount of texture warping here for the PlayStation 1, but overall everything has a nice amount of detail and it all plays surprisingly well without much in the way of slowdown. The game can also be played in 2-player, where you go head to head in competing the objectives for the levels. Of course, I have no friends, so I didn't get to try this, but I can imagine it being pretty hectic and quite fun against a mate. If you're into vehicles blowing the crap out of each other, then give this a go. It's a fun time. Next up is Guardian Crusade, an RPG from Tamsoft Corporation. The story here is that a pink Moomin looking thing is dropped from the sky after a bunch of Ridleys and a stork are all struck by lightning. The monster things land near your village, and in an interesting turn of events, you are actually already a hero, rather than being a 4-year-old who gets his first sword like every other RPG out there. As the hero, it's your job to get rid of the monster, but you'll end up making friends with it, and soon the story gets actually quite deep, with the monster being the key to stopping the end of the world. It's actually pretty good. The whole game is made of 3D polygons, which are a bit basic, but do look quite cool. The character designs and enemies especially are all decent, and new ones appear all the time. The combat is all turn-based and could be really seen as an RPG light, as it's not complex at all and would be perfect for someone new to the genre. Like me really, I've never even played a Final Fantasy game. You can choose to attack, defend, use magic or an item, and then you take it in turns with the enemy to slap each other. What's cool is that you can actually see the enemies on the map, so there's no random battles here. You never actually know what monster you are going to fight against though, as they're all just represented by a ghost looking thing, and if you touch one you go into battle and you see how many monsters there really are. Something that I quite like here is that you can tell from the size of the ghost thing how tough the monster's going to be, so the bigger it is the tougher the enemy. So it means if you aren't very strong or don't have any healing items, then you want to avoid the larger sized ghosts. Equally, for the smaller ghosts, which are enemies weaker than you, that you'll likely beat in 1 or 2 hits, they'll actually try to run away from you. This is a really cool touch, and it was a good way to know when you should and shouldn't go into combat. You can also adjust the speed of the battles, so you don't spend loads of time just watching long animations playing out. I really like this, as I'm pretty impatient, and that's why the battle footage that you're seeing here looks a bit strange, because I have it set to the maximum speed. As you progress, you'll explore a load of different areas, including forests, caves, oceans, deserts and ice worlds. You know, the usual places you see in games. Each location has unique enemies, and you'll even find items and treasure chests that contain new weapons and armour to make you more powerful. Also, there's a load of towns all over the place where you'll be able to rest and get your health back, as well as visit the shops to stock up on whatever you need. There's also NPCs around the place here that will usually spout nonsense at you like they tend to do in RPGs, but some of them will give you side quests or hints or sometimes even items. These tend to be fetch quests if they are quests, or just to kill a certain enemy, but it's nice to have a few extra things to do. There's a mini-map which is very handy while you're getting out and about, but beware as it's not on by default and you'll need to go into the menu to activate it manually. I never leave home without my mini-map, and neither should you. Further into the game, you get a few more party members as you'd expect, and they'll be pretty handy for some of the tougher fights, though I never found the game to be overly challenging. This would be a great game for someone new to the RPG scene. It's pretty simple, but works well enough. It looks cute and has a decent story. It's well worth a look if you're into this sort of stuff and want a fairly easy playthrough. Now it's time for what is probably the best game on the PlayStation 1. Gubble! I love this game, and I have no idea why, as I'm aware that it's actually kinda crap. I used to have it on the PC, and when I found out there was a PS1 version, I just had to have it. You play as Gubble, an intergalactic DIY expert who also happens to be a purple alien in a crappy floating chair. Your objective is to go around the dozens of levels in the game, riding on various tools and using that tool to unscrew screws, pull out nails, hammer walls, and so on. Basically, you use the tool for whatever it's used for. In a nutshell, the game plays kinda like Pac-Man, with every level being a maze-like area, often with multiple layers and sections. Each level has screws, nails, bolts, and other DIY paraphernalia knocking about all over the place. So you've got to hunt the level for the relevant tool to be able to deal with the screws or whatever it needs to deal with. You can get on and off tools as often as you like, and you'll need to switch between them all to complete the levels. Also, there's enemies and hazards all over the place too. If you touch them, you lose health. Lose all your health and it's game over. No saves or passwords. Screw you. Your crappy chair thing can also hover though, and you can use this to avoid pretty much every enemy in the game, and you'll need to time your movements well in order to not get hit, though it's fairly easy to figure out the patterns of enemies. There are also a few power-ups you can collect on the levels. These are your usual health power-ups, speed power-ups, and temporary shields. You can also find bonus levels. These are found in the other levels, and they're just there to give you points, though I actually found that I avoided these most of the time, as points don't really do anything, as you only get one life anyway. The graphics here are a funny one. Everything is pre-rendered. Gubble himself has no animation whatsoever, other than rotating, which is a little odd. The enemies have a few frames, but nothing out of this world, but it all does the job. I have to say though, I really love the music here, and some of the tracks really give off Tim Burton vibes. The sound is also decent, and Gubble makes some stupid noises, but it never gets too annoying. And that is basically Gubble. There really isn't much to say about it. You just go around a bunch of levels using tools to pull up screws and nails, but for some reason I really enjoy playing this one. It's a simple arcade style game that's really more fun than it has any right to be. It won't be for everyone, but I do recommend trying it for a few levels before you disregard it. And finally for today, here is Gunslinger, the Legend of Jesse James, a light gun shooter set in the Old West. Now, I'm going to guess that you can guess the story without me even telling it to you. That's right, you are Jesse James, and you're a cowboy, and you gotta kill them varmin outlaws that have done kidnapped your girl. And it's all done in a first-person light gun fashion. The game mechanics taken straight out of the Time Crisis series. Here you go through your usual western-themed levels like saloons, gold mines, cactus-filled levels, towns and bandit camps. You've got your trusty 6-shooter and unlimited ammo, and you have to kill everyone you see. Well, almost everyone. Enemies come in range of varieties. You get your common goons to people with shotguns, molotovs, axes, bows and arrows, and so on. As in the Time Crisis games, you can take cover to avoid enemy shots, and then you pop out to take out the enemies. Hiding also reloads your gun, and there's a few pictures of cards in the bottom left of the screen which act as your health. Enemies will be constantly shooting at you, and while there's no indicator to say when you're about to be hit, you can see the enemy bullets, so it's often easy to know roughly when you're about to be shot. Also, enemies come in a few different colours, with some being more accurate than others, and you'll soon learn which ones to avoid or to kill first. What's a little annoying here though is that enemies don't wait to shoot at you when you pop out from cover. They'll just be consistently shooting, meaning there are times when you pop out from behind cover and don't realise that you've just been shot at, so you pop out and the bullet immediately hits your face, and there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it. This can be kind of frustrating. Of course, it didn't help that I was playing the game with the controller rather than an actual light gun, so my reactions weren't as good as they should have been. Something that's kinda handy though is that if you are playing with the controller, you can position your cursor anywhere on the screen while you're in cover and it stays there when you pop out, meaning you can pop out for just a second, get a rough idea of where the enemies are, go back in cover, place the cursor roughly where the enemy is, and then when you come out again you're pretty much already lined up. Once I realised how to use this properly, the game was much more manageable. The levels here are also timed, so you can't hang around for too long, though generally I didn't ever come close to running out on the timer. Also, there are time pickups on the levels that you can shoot for some precious extra seconds, and you'll also find a generous amount of health packs, and overall, the game is actually quite fair. The graphics here are good, the character models are decent and animate well, the cutscenes are great and have suitably crap voicing acting which is just terrible, but it makes the game unintentionally funny and I very much approve. The soundtrack is great and what you'd expect from a western, with the usual whistles and dramatic yee-haws. It was very enjoyable. I'd never heard of this game before and I didn't realise it was going to be a light gun game, but I ended up really having a lot of fun with it and would definitely recommend adding it to your collection, especially if you're a fan of a light gun and you have one handy. So there you go, 10 hidden gems for the PS1, starting with the letter G. Hopefully there's something here for everyone. As always, let us know what other games should be included in this or any other letter, and make sure you check out the rest of the videos in this series, as there's a ton of games that you might want to try. On screen now you can see where you can follow us, so why not do so? We've got loads of cool content for everyone to enjoy. Now all that's left for me to say is to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.